Hello everyone, and a good day to all of you. I wanted to do a review today on this March Tactical D8V24FML scope. That is a mouthful, because this is one you don't really see too often, but I do think it's a pretty good scope, so I wanted to talk about my experiences with it. And I'm going to be comparing this to a lot of different scopes that are around the same price range. Short dot, I have a Parallax LPVO, this is an LPVO, as well as my old scope, which was a primary arms ACSS, which I'll also be comparing it quite a bit to, although that's in a completely different category, I understand, but it'll be a good comparison because I have a ton of time behind that scope. So I wanted to start with actually a price comparison, which I was kind of bringing up already, the whole class of scope that this is in. So pretty much everything that I'm going to be talking about today is around the $2,000 to $3,000 range, with the exception of that primary arms ACSS I was mentioning, which is a lot less. And one other kind of weird thing about the short dot here, this is an older model. The newer ones are around $5,000 to $6,000 last I checked. So that was actually a big reason why I did not pick up a short dot. I was wanting to put one onto here. They're phenomenal scopes. I have a fair bit of time behind this short dot as well, and I love them. But the price has gotten kind of crazy on them, and I just didn't want to spend that much on a scope. And actually, one other major point that I was looking at with these scopes is the weight. The newest short dot is about 24 ounces, and this March scope is pretty impressive with how light it is at about just a pound. So I'll put the weights up of what these scopes all actually weigh, including the ACSS, just for comparison. This is definitely the lightest, but it's only an ounce lighter, which is pretty impressive because this is a second focal plane scope, and generally you do see lighter weights on the second focal plane scopes when compared to the first focal plane scopes, but it is impressive that it's only an ounce heavier for this, which is a first focal plane scope. Before I go any further, I did want to take just a very quick second to just explain the difference between first and second focal plane, because I know not everyone understands what that means. So first focal plane, pretty much the reticle moves when you zoom in. That is a lot more helpful for longer range shooting because unlike with a second focal plane, which some people say and prefer it for closer, like with LPVOs, they do prefer for kind of closer range work, but the benefit of having a reticle that gets larger while you zoom in is that you have a consistent zero when you're between ranges. With a second focal plane, you don't have that consistency. Now there is also a third type of focal plane, a dual focal plane, which is what the newer short dots are. This older one, this is just a first focal plane, but the newest ones have a dual focal plane. How that works, your reticle is going to be moving on the second focal plane. I believe on the short dots they have an actual, pretty much a red dot in the very center, and that's always on the second focal plane. However, you also have a nice ranging reticle in there that is on the first focal plane. So that ranging reticle zooms in as you change that, but you still have a consistent, just a dot for the closer work, which seems really nice, but it does seem like those dual focal plane scopes from what I've seen are the heaviest compared to any of these other ones. So that's enough about comparisons for now. Let's actually start talking about this scope itself. I'm going to kind of be going mostly kind of talking about this from the outside and moving inwards, with just one exception when I'm talking about just some miscellaneous stuff at the end. So we're going to go ahead and start with the adjustments, starting with the diopter back here. I really like this diopter, and this was actually a very specific setup that I really sought out. So what I was using before this, the ACSS, one problem I've had, at least recently, maybe this has loosened up over time, but I have noticed that this diopter here is very, very easy to turn. I've actually witness marked it right there because so often when I'm transporting this, I check it when I get out and it's been bumped and I need to always reset it. So what this March scope does differently is they actually have a lock. So the diopter otherwise works the same way, but how this locking mechanism works is, so if you look right here, this is your zoom, just like normal, except actually interestingly on this March scope, this is reversed, so you're actually turning it clockwise to zoom it up. So you got your zoom right here. Then right behind this, you have this little collar, and you just turn that, and I'm going to back this off ever so slightly for a second. So you would turn this, and you can see that just loosened it up there, and then that tightens it back down. So if I go ahead and just do this a lot, and then I can just fix it later. So I just loosened my diopter quite a bit. You can see that gap right there. So how this lock mechanism works is you take this collar and you would just run this down to where you have your diopter, and you would just kind of hand tighten it. They do explicitly recommend you to not over tighten it That wouldn't be good for the scope. But this has worked phenomenally from my experience so far. And I'm just going to reset this back to where I had it before. So I really like that. It, of course, works great to prevent this from moving when you're transporting it. Now this locking mechanism, it is just pushing downwards in this direction. So your diopter still could potentially back off like this. I haven't had that happen. This diopter does require more force just in general to adjust compared to that ACSS, but this has worked great. And if that does happen, you can just tighten this down until it's snug with the lock. Comparing that to the short dot, this does not have a lock, but it's pretty similar. This does require quite a bit of force, and I'm not going to adjust this because I'm just borrowing this scope, so I don't want to mess with the diopter, but it is kind of difficult to adjust the diopter, which is a good thing because you don't want that moving around all on its own. But when you actually do need to move it, it's not like struggling and fighting against you either, if that makes sense. I did mention that I also have experience with a Parallax LPVO, which I have here, and about the same, I've noticed. Again, this does not have a locking mechanism on the diopter, but it also doesn't have issues. It's just kind of just that ACSS that I've noticed really does want to back off a bit too easily. Moving forward to the adjustment turrets here. So these are all done in 0.1 mils, which is nice, quite precise. Which you can just see right there. And these do not have actual caps. Now, I personally don't think you really need caps, even if you're worried about like a serious use sort of rifle, because these caps are extremely, again, they're not like overly difficult to where they're fighting you when you're trying to adjust them, but they're not so loose that they're going to back out on their own either and mess up your zero. If that does happen, they do mark where the zero is, and they have these little set screws here in both the windage and the elevation turret, which you can see right there. You can just unscrew those and then turn this back to zero. So I've already got this zeroed, and then once I confirmed it and everything, I just undid these set screws, just pulled this over to where the zero's lined up. And that way, if it does get bumped, I can see it. And also if I am shooting way longer range where I need to up my elevation or my windage or anything like that, I can just, when I'm done, just quickly turn it back down to zero, and I know I'm exactly where I was before. I don't know how well this will translate to video, but just to kind of show, it doesn't require a huge amount of force, but it's also not so little that it's going to back out on you either. And then, for example, for comparison on this ACSS, you have an actual cap you have to undo, and then you can just adjust it here. And I am glad that this one does have caps because they are quite a bit easier to move on their own if it didn't have caps. However, all the rest of these scopes that I'm talking about today are uncapped, so I don't think it's really an issue. This short dot, again, doesn't have any caps, has the same sort of set screw system there on both of them, so you can adjust it and turn it back to zero. And exact same on this Parallax as well. So you can see right there. And as far as a comparison, it does seem like it's about the same amount of forces on this short dot that you need to turn the zero. About the same on this march here. Let's move to the inside of the scope now, talking about the reticle. So March on this exact optic, and I believe on most of their optics, or LPVOs I should say, they all have similar reticle options. There's 3 options from March, FMC 1, 2, and 3. I picked the FMC 3, which I personally think would probably be the best reticle for a bit longer range work. I believe it's the FMC 2 that they have that has like an outer ring and then an inner ring, almost somewhat like an EOTech, which seems like if you're worried more about doing a bit more closer work with the LPVO, that might be a better option. However, yeah, I went with the FMC 3, which I'm quite happy with. So on this FMC 3 reticle, you have a little bit of a circle in the middle, which I do think helps to acquire it a bit quicker. And then you also have a mil hash mark, and then they are marked every 5. And then the very bottom, you can see, goes down quite a bit further than the rest, which, again, that's what I was referring to when I was saying that I think that this would work better for longer range work, because that is more, there's just more hash marks there in the bottom. And the illumination is quite nice. I've noticed even in broad daylight, you can still make out the illumination quite well and just have that little bit of red to help pick up on it. Now, one kind of weird feature on here is the illumination adjustment. So right here on the left side of this scope, So this is where you adjust your illumination. So on the side, you have this gray button. It's a very, very light push. You just press that, and I wish it was more tactile and also that it required more of a push to actually get it to illuminate or to turn off. It is recessed, thankfully, so it's not going to get accidentally pushed most likely, but it is just such a light push that I would worry about that potentially. Haven't had it happen yet, but it could. It's pretty difficult to get this at a good angle for the camera, but right here there's a little white dot you can see. Right now this is on setting 5. Now what's weird is, despite this being an LPVO, this actually is a parallax adjustment, but what is very bizarre is that this is on the exact same plane as the illumination adjustment. So you kind of have to hold this in, because the parallax is pretty easy to adjust. So you have to hold that while moving that around. Just like so. Which is a good point to talk about the parallax adjustment. Very, very odd feature to have on an LPVO. Usually you only see that on MPVOs and up. For example, this Collis, which is an MPVO, does have a parallax adjustment. However, none of the rest of the scopes have this. The ACSS doesn't, the short dot doesn't, and I'm not aware of any other LPVOs that have it either. It does work great though, and then of course, once you get it properly adjusted for wherever you're shooting at, it's crystal clear. If you are worried though about taking quicker shots and not messing around with the parallax, usually what I've done when I'm going on hunting trips, for example, is I'll take, just kind of gauge the approximate distance I'm expecting to shoot at deer or whatever with, and I will usually around here, that's about 200-ish. So I'll just look at something that's about 200 yards out and just get it to look good there, and then just forget about it from there. Next, on the glass quality, this is one that really does not show up well at all, I've found, when trying to record it. All the cameras auto adjust to make it look good when you're looking through glass, so they all end up looking about the same. Just for my own qualitative comparison though, I have found that the glass on this March scope is very, very similar to the short dot. I haven't really picked up any irregularities. There may be a slight bit of a blue tint, maybe ever so slight. Compared to the ACSS, I've noticed there's a faint yellow orange-ish tint. Again, very, very faint, but it is definitely, you can pick up on it a little bit. And I don't have as much use on that Collis MPVO, but I have noticed it's about the same. One thing I have noticed that's really nice on this is this does gather light remarkably well. If you look at the dimensions of this, actually, it's again a little bit different from a normal LPVO, where you actually have the front here bells out a little bit. This actually goes up. So this is a 30mm tube overall, and that's the kind of mount you'd want to use. However, this right here bells out to a 33mm, compared to most, where it's just a straight tube all the way out. So I think the light gathering capabilities of this scope, from what I've seen so far in my use, have been really, really good. I have other scopes that are pretty bad with that, so I always appreciate one that I can actually see through around dusk. One thing I wanted to mention actually here, on this specific March scope now, I think the much better known March scope for their LPVOs is their Shorty, which is a 1:10 actually, and it is a really short and very light scope. It's pretty impressive. It's also a dual focal plane. However, the reason I didn't go with that one is because they actually use a proprietary mount. So this whole part right here, the ocular, is shoved way back. What I particularly don't like, and the reason I didn't go with that one, is because they do use a proprietary mount, where the rear scope ring is 30mm. However, because again they have this enlarged bit of the ocular right here that's pushed so far back, they actually have a larger front ring to accommodate that. So you won't be able to use a standard mount. Compared to this one, you can use any mount in the world that you want. And in my case, I'm using a Unity fast LPVO mount, 2-inch height, which I love. I love this height a lot. Let's talk about the eye relief next. This is one of the few areas that I would say isn't the greatest. So I've noticed, especially when moving and shooting and not being in the absolute perfect position right behind the scope, that you kind of do need to get your eye in just the right spot. It's not extremely finicky. Comparing that to the ACSS, however, that actually has a pretty impressive eye box where you can be kind of all over the place and still get at least a partial sight picture. It's definitely more forgiving on 1 power, and these are both on 1 power. And the short dot is the same way. This has really, really good eye relief. I don't have this mounted right now, so it's not really possible to show that. But from what I have used of it, it is very comparable to that ACSS. It's a really good. Eye relief is just excellent. So now I did want to talk about some of those miscellaneous features that I brought up at the start. So I wasn't aware of this. They don't actually tell you what this ships with, but they actually do send this with scope caps, a throw lever, and a little adjustment hex key that you can use to remove these set screws that I was saying about to set your zero. The throw lever, I don't use throw levers generally. I like to keep this pretty low profile so it doesn't get snagged on anything. But that throw lever does seem really, really flimsy. The scope caps, on the other hand, are really nice. I love these a lot. These do lock. Both the ocular and the objective scope caps do lock. It's just I have the ocular flipped down just because then it's, again, lower profile, not as much sticking up above the scope. So you can just see, this is how most scope caps go out, but if you just push it, you can hear hopefully that little click there, and it just stays right here. And also it's nice and flush with the side of the scope, and just phenomenal scope caps. I'm really happy with that. And these are also a very, very tight fit as well. These are not going to move on their own at all. Actually, they're a little bit tough to take off. I kind of had to pound them on to put them on, and yeah, they're a little bit annoying to take off if you ever need to. And I am glad that they did send these good scope caps. I have used some pretty bad ones in the past. I would say that's a pretty major downside of the ACSS. Again, it is a much cheaper scope, but the original scope caps on here were pretty bad. And the reason I don't have them is because they broke. And I have some also pretty bad, unfortunately, scope caps that I picked up on Amazon, just some cheap Chinese crap. And they're also halfway broken already. So not great there. I generally use like Butler Creek. I've heard the Tenebrex scope caps are really good, but these Dion March actual OEM scope caps are phenomenal as well. That about covers everything on the scope itself. One other thing about this is, if you recall, I did mention at the start of the video that this is kind of a rarer scope that you don't see too much on. I wasn't able to find any reviews on this specific scope, or really any March scopes, except for just random Japanese videos on guys just like showing the reticle. But there's not very much information on that, and part of it is because of how hard they are to find. I actually backordered this about, I believe, this was backordered. I ordered this through Euro-Optic myself, and I actually emailed them when I finally had the money together and I was kind of set on buying this. And they mentioned that they were actually going to get one in pretty soon from Japan, that they had an order out to them and that they were getting ready to ship eventually. And it's not like I didn't understand that. They did make it very clear how long the back order time would be. And actually they were ever so slightly quicker than they were supposed to be as well. But if you want to get these scopes, you are absolutely not going to, well, I should say most likely, you're not going to find these just laying around in stock anywhere. You'll probably need to back order them. The reason for that apparently is that March makes these more or less to order, and then whenever a company does order them, they just do small amounts, like Euro-Optic, I think. I ordered the only one in that entire shipment that they had, and so then they never got it in stock, because obviously I ordered the only one they had. So do keep that in mind. If you do go with this scope, be absolutely prepared for a long wait. This is not one that you can just walk in, even if you know of a high-end optics shop, you're most likely not going to see one in there. So it was kind of a gamble. From what I've been finding from my own usage of it so far, this is an absolutely excellent scope. My only complaint is the eye box, which is not even that bad either. It definitely could be better, but it's not the worst. And especially for the price. I was really wanting to get that short dot. I think they look, first of all, they look cool because the new ones are in RAL or in Pantone, which is kind of like an FDE color. And also they're just really, really well built scopes. But for the price, they've gotten a bit insane, $5,000 to $6,000 for an LPVO. This is not cheap either, but I think that for what you're getting, it is, with optics, and actually with a lot of things, but especially with optics, the closer you get to trying to get an absolute perfect cutting edge scope, the just exponentially more it's going to cost. And comparing how many features you get that the short dot also has, I think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth the extra several thousand to go with the short dot instead. As for the Collis, which I've been occasionally bringing up, if you'll notice, I didn't really talk about it a huge amount in this video. I don't have as much time behind that MPVO. Collis does make LPVOs as well. I didn't want to go with that because I wanted a first focal plane. At least currently as of recording this, Collis only makes second focal plane LPVOs. I think this is a great scope. It's a little weird to say, especially for the price when it is so expensive, but it is, especially when comparing it to the short dot and some of the similar ones around that same price range. Unfortunately, I don't have experience, as I said, with the Night Force, which I know a lot of people are interested in, so I can't compare it to that. But hopefully this was a informative comparison and a review regardless. Let me know if you do have any other questions on this, if there's anything I missed, if there's any other just comments in general you had, or questions about anything, then do let me know. Always love to hear those. Otherwise, look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Take care, and I'll see you all then.